So you think you've got a rock-solid family tree? Think again. Let's consider some of Mike's rules. Shh. DNA never lies. Some people would like to think the DNA companies can make mistakes. They don't. Some people would like to hope that the DNA results are wrong. Sorry, no. DNA makes the connections when paper records don't even exist. The answers you're looking for won't be found in any dusty old books. DNA reveals the facts that may have been intentionally hidden and explains how you're connected to everyone else. Because DNA never lies. Shh. Your ancestors lied. Your parents probably lied when they said, "Don't have sex before marriage." We didn't. I call BS. If you look at your family tree, you can figure out the shotgun weddings. Take the birth date of the firstborn minus the marriage date and oops, you do the math. Then your family starts lying about those dates, not knowing that eventually the genealogists in the family will have access to those records. A family tree based on lies is a work of fiction. It's up to us genealogists to find the facts, whatever they may be. You'll never know how good or bad your family tree is until you validate with DNA. As an example, when I first built my family tree using traditional sources, I had multiple lines that went back multiple generations, and I had some that were solid stone walls. Then I validated with DNA and everything flipped. My well-documented lines started to crumble and my gaps started to fill in nicely. What will it take to validate your family tree? Let's take a look at some validation examples. Say you want to validate that your mother is your mother. Hi, Mom. And you're saying, well, wait a minute. My mom is my mom. And I'm saying, are you sure? If you were adopted and no one told you, would you know the difference? Now, your DNA alone may not be enough to solve this first family mystery. If possible, test your mother. If that's not an option, try testing a sibling. If you and your sibling share about 2,500 centimorgans, that means you're full siblings and you have the same mother and father. That does not mean that mom is mom and dad is dad. If you and your siblings share about 1,700 centimorgans, then someone's got some splaining to do. That means you and your sibling do not have the same father, or perhaps you don't have the same mother. The next step would be to look at the DNA of a first cousin on your mother's side. You know, the child of one of your mother's brothers or sisters. You and your first cousin should share about 850 centimorgans of DNA. Much more or much less means that there's probably a skeleton or two that needs to come out of the closet. Now, this should validate that your mother and her sibling are related and that you all share a common maternal grandmother. I need to point out that this does not mean that you have validated that your maternal grandpa is your grandpa. To validate your maternal grandfather, you're going to have to go back another generation to a second cousin, specifically on your maternal grandfather's side. I have a general rule of thumb. Mothers will be mothers, but fathers will be who knows. You'll always need to go back one extra generation to a female in order to validate the male side of a family relationship. To validate a grandmother, you're going to need a first cousin DNA match. To validate a great grandmother, you're going to need a second cousin match. To validate a second great-grandmother, you're going to need a third cousin match, and so on. On the male side, if you need to validate your grandfather, you're going to need a second cousin match, which is a generation further back than where you started with your grandmother. For a great-grandfather, you're going to need a third cousin match. You should see a pattern forming here. When you're validating on the male side, you're actually validating back to their mother. Don't fall into the trap of, I looked at my first cousin's family tree and we both have the same fourth great-grandparents. We both can't be wrong. You can both be wrong, unless you have validated using a DNA match of the correct distance, namely a fifth cousin. As you are validating, you'll get familiar with the amount of DNA that is shared between different relationships. Here's some examples in centimorgans. There are about 3,400 centimorgans between a parent and a child, about 2,500 centimorgans between siblings, about 1,700 centimorgans for a grandparent-child relationship or aunt-uncle-child relationship or half-siblings. There's about 850 centimorgans for first cousins and about 425 centimorgans for first cousins once removed, etc. There are statistics for every relationship. These numbers are never exact, but should be close. I have seen some situations where the numbers can be additive. For example, 850 for a first cousin plus 212 for a second cousin, totaling about 1,000 centimorgans in the case of double cousins. Check out my favorite site for reference at isogg.org. That's the International Society of Genetic Genealogists. See the link below. You should be able to take most of your DNA matches and fit them into your family tree. Take the time to fill in the branches and document all the connections. Now, some DNA software will allow you to add custom tags to the people in your tree. In Ancestry, I use my tree tags with tags like DNA match, orphan, or stone wall. Now that you've added your DNA match to your tree, trace them back to your common maternal ancestor. Then in Ancestry, use custom tags to mark them as DNA verified. Now, not every DNA match is going to fit easily into your tree. Start by trying to figure out which side of the family they belong to and which family line they closely align with by using the Shared Matches tool. Check out my tech tidbit on color coding your DNA. To figure out how they fit into your tree, take a look at their tree. If they have a well-crafted tree, you'll probably be able to spot your common ancestor right away, validating the connection. More likely, they've got a partial tree, and you're going to need to build and fix their tree until you can figure out the common ancestor. I use a second family tree as my scratch pad for fixing and building. Check out my tech tidbit on managing multiple trees. Some family lines will be easy to validate, and some family lines you won't be able to find a match at all. DNA inheritance is imperfect. The DNA that you got will not be exactly the same as what your siblings received. Try testing your siblings or a member of an older generation in the family line that you're trying to validate. Your siblings will have different DNA segments than you. This may give them DNA matches that you don't have, which would then provide clues and possibly solve a mystery. Now, after you're done testing more people and finding more matches, if you still can't validate, you're going to have to accept that you've got a gap in your family tree that might be due to a non-parental event, like an adoption or an infidelity. It's time to look at your mystery groups. Now, big caveat here. You may only be able to go back 5, 6, 7 generations before the amount of shared DNA gets too small to use. When you can't find a paternal surname among your matches, you probably have a non-paternal event. But when you can't find the maternal surnames either, then you probably have a hidden adoption. Sometimes your DNA matches just don't fit. Perhaps they have an unvalidated connection in their tree, a non-parental event. In one situation, I have a match that shares a ton of DNA with my Italian cousins, yet this person doesn't have any Italian names in their tree. We're gonna need a bigger tree. So my DNA match and I started working together to solve the mystery by first looking at their tree to find the genetic gap. A perfect example of an ancestor that can't be validated is when you search your DNA matches for your ancestor's surname and you get no hits. The next step for my DNA cousin and I is to identify an Italian ancestor using their DNA matches. For a better understanding of this step, check out my tech tidbit, Finding Biofamilies. Success! You now have a potential ancestor to fill that genetic gap in your family tree. Now we have to do a little detective work to see if there's means, motive, and opportunity. The two parties in question, and you can use whatever terms of endearment you like, were they in the right place at the right time to produce that grandfather? The bottom line is that DNA never lies, and you'll never know what's real until each of your ancestral connections has the DNA evidence to back it up.